This is the third episode in a series about the 4 core performance skills. And today we're going to talk about the skill that I would guess is most common among musicians throughout the world, even those who have never taken a lesson. And that is the skill of playing by ear. We're going to talk about that next. Hello and welcome to the Musician Toolkit, episode number 86. My name is David Lane, I'm your host, and it is great to be with you once again. So as I mentioned in the introduction, this is the third in a series. I would encourage you to listen to all of the series. You don't necessarily have to listen to them in order. So if you're checking this out first and then you want to go back and check out episodes 84 and 85, before going on with episodes 87 or 88 or whatever order you want to do, this is fine. It's all related, but it is not told in a particular chronological order or anything like that. So again, we're talking about the 4 core performance skills. And because I've already done an overview episode on it, and I did kind of an extensive recap on the last episode, episode 85, I'm going to be a little bit more brief on this episode and then future episodes in the series. In a nutshell, I'm talking about the big skills that you need when you play your instrument in any given situation. And it's something that I've thought about, like how can I narrow down everything I've ever done in my musical career in the fewest number of skills that I've actually needed. And I came up with 4. And those 4 are sight reading, playing by ear, transposing, and improvising. On episode 84, I talked about the overview of those skills. And then on episode 85, we focused on sight reading, and today we're going to be talking about playing by ear. Now, before I say more about that, I want to address something that's been on my mind since I started this series. And it's time for me to address those of you who are classical musicians, especially those of you who probably play in an orchestra. Now, before I say this and before I get a lot of pushback on this, I realize I'm a listener of podcasts as often as I am a producer of podcasts, probably even more so. Spend more time listening than I spend recording here. I know what it's like to listen to someone use the second person, use words like you, and it's very easy to think that, he's talking just to me. But I have to remind myself, no, he's talking to me and other people like me. So if I say something that sounds like, well, that's a stereotype, it might be, and I know this will not apply to all of you, but I just want to say that because some of you are going to feel challenged, some of you are going to feel defensive. Classical musicians, let me ask you this. Of the 4 skills, the 4 core skills that I just mentioned, sight reading, playing by ear, transposing, and improvising, how many of you are really, honestly, only good at sight reading? How many of you, if you had to play by ear, if you had to transpose, if you had to improvise, how many of you would find that to be difficult? You'd find it to be a weakness, or maybe you haven't really even done it at all, outside of maybe some classroom assignments when you were studying. This is a challenge for music teachers who were brought up in classical training. How many of you teach any of these skills besides sight reading? Now, I bet a lot of you are going to jump in and say, well, wait a minute, I teach ear training. Ear training is a sub-skill, and it's an important skill. It's actually just as applicable to helping you with sight reading, as I mentioned in the previous episode, as it is with playing by ear, but playing by ear is something different. It's a core skill that uses ear training and a lot of other things. First of all, it's great if you teach ear training. That is an important sub-skill that makes all of your core skills better. If you're good at ear training, you're going to be better at your core skills. And obviously, it is an essential skill for playing by ear. But how many of you teach and allow your students to exercise playing by ear? I know some of you do. I also know some of you don't. And so this isn't entirely hypothetical. I'm not saying that the people I've met are listening to this episode, but I have worked with very good musicians who essentially beg me to only ask them to play what's in front of them. So when I talk about these core skills, I'm not saying that you can't have a very good career by only doing one of them well. Actually, the main point of this podcast has never been, first and foremost, to help you with your music career. It's to give you the tools that you can need to succeed in music, whether or not it's a career or whether or not it's just a hobby. Knowing all four skills not only prevents you from being limited in the type of work that you can do if you are a professional, but it gives you a lot of freedom if you're just doing this for a passion. So in my mind, sight reading is almost distinct from these other three, because these other three are very related when it comes to kind of the parts of your brain that are at work and the types of skills that will really help. So playing by ear, transposing, and improvising all have a lot of common points, but we're going to address each of them one at a time. So again, today we're going to talk about playing by ear. Why is playing by ear important? First of all, it's liberating, as I just kind of implied. It's a great skill to be able to read sheet music, especially if you can read it at a high level in the first attempt, aka sight reading, and you have the practice skills to improve that and do really well. But you know what's also great? Not needing sheet music to learn a piece. It is wonderful to listen to something, sit down and play it, and not have to say, I wish I had the sheet music for that. The second reason why playing by ear is important is you're tapping into a primal way of learning music. I am not a musicologist. I couldn't tell you how long music has been around. I suspect it predates our societies. The instinct to sing, I assume that is probably encoded into our genes. But we know we can go back to ancient civilizations. We can go back to ancient Egypt. We can go back to Greece. We can go back to Rome, and there is music. So at a bare minimum, 1,000 years BC, we have music. And I think way before then. But I'm just going to conservatively say, if you'll take 1,000 BC, it's kind of where we know we had music, that someone could learn a piece of music themselves. Well, we have to get to about 500 AD before we start finding music that's actually written down. So you've got about 1,500 years where you solely played by ear. And then it was mostly church musicians for probably about 700 or 800 years that used sheet music, and everyone else played by ear. And if you're not a trained musician, that is to say, if you haven't studied written sheet music, you rely on your ear. You rely on being able to figure things out by listening. And the third reason why playing by ear is important is if you want to be a well-rounded musician, if you don't want to just be, quote unquote, a classical musician, playing by ear is what is required to do well by the vast majority of genres. So next, let's talk about two ways that you can actually play by ear. So when I say the phrase playing by ear, of course I'm talking about you listen to something and then you play it. But there's really two versions of that. So one is to play something that you've heard as fully, completely, and accurately as possible. So that would be like listening to the theme from Star Wars and not only playing it in the key that it was recorded of B flat major, but also trying to get the chord shapes and voicings just right. And there's actually, by the way, if you listen to, there's some bitonality in that theme. There are bass notes that don't belong with the rest of the chord. This is something, John Williams has been known to do quite a bit. And anyways, if you're trying to, as fully, completely, and accurately as possible, play what you're hearing, you try to get all of that. You try to get everything that your hands can grab and so forth. And again, I'm thinking as playing it on the piano, but maybe you're a clarinetist and you're listening to the clarinet part and you're trying to play exactly what you hear them playing, as opposed to just playing the melody, which would go into the second thing that you can do when you're playing by ear. If you're not playing as fully, completely, and accurately as possible, you're playing something you've heard, but more as a paraphrase, possibly maybe even a simplification. And I'm going to say that probably, especially if you're a young musician and you're playing by ear, like a young music student, I should say, this is how you do it at first. It takes a lot of practice, a lot of study to be able to listen to, especially something as complicated as Star Wars, and figure out exactly what's going on in terms of harmony, in terms of, imitating all of the independent rhythms and so forth, and getting it, of course, in the correct key. But I can remember being 8 years old, maybe 9 years old, somewhere around then, and going to the piano and figuring out the melody in the key of C major and coming up with some semblance of harmony in the left hand that fit what was going on and maybe was not too far removed from what was going on, in a way that I could play it for someone else and then go, oh yeah, that's the theme for Star Wars. But there's a different set of skills for each of those. So paraphrasing or making something a simplification, of course, that is the easier way of going about it from actually playing it back and figuring out what to play back. But at the same time, it's kind of like if you read a book and you want to memorize what it says or what a chapter says. Well, there's one skill that says you close the book and you recite from memory, basically, everything you just read, word for word. And then there's another type of skill where in your own language, in your own words, you explain what it's about. You leave out some details. In fact, you probably leave out a lot of details and you try to get to the gist of it. So the first thing I want to say is both of these are valuable and accurate ways of playing by ear, whether you're paraphrasing or whether you're trying to get the accurate full version. So what are some sources for playing by ear? In other words, what are you listening to in order to give you the music that you want to play by ear? This is important for when you are practicing doing this. So the first one is an actual sound clip. Could be from an album or streaming online or from YouTube or from a movie that's playing. So in other words, you're hearing the recorded music that you now want to try to play on your instrument. So that is the first source, an actual sound clip. The second one is someone singing an idea to you or singing something they've heard. Like, hey, have you heard this song? And you hear la, 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 la. And maybe their voice is good enough that you can pretty much nail what they want. But other times, someone they'll sing something to you and either they can't sing very well or they're not trying very hard. And what you're getting more of anything is a rhythm and a basic contour. And you have to kind of play around to find what it is that they're talking about. So it's kind of like troubleshooting when someone says there's something wrong with my car. You have to kind of go through some things to figure out, well, what is actually wrong with the car? In this case, what is it that you want me to play for you that I'm supposed to gather by listening? So that can be frustrating at times, but it's also a good exercise for just kind of really listening to, how someone else hears music and how they present it, and then how you can figure out what they meant, not just what they sang. And then the third source from which you can practice playing by ear is your own memory. And I mentioned this before. I've had at least one gig before where I did not have the music for the first movement of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, and someone asked me to play that. It was for dinner music. I was playing a variety of like light classical and some, soft jazz and all that. I did not have that piece with me. And I cannot say that I've ever practiced it to the point to where, it was in my repertoire. It's one of those pieces that when I decided to learn it at one point, that first movement at least was within my range of sight reading. So I've always been able to just open the music and play it. But I obviously know how it sounds. I know it in my head. So my source of playing it was playing what was in my head. And I know I missed some things, but I was able to generally play that piece based on the memory I have of having heard it, but also having seen it before. But this happens sometimes. People ask me to play something, and I know how it goes. And so I don't need to hear it again. I just need to hear it from my inner thoughts and play what my brain is thinking of at the moment. So as I did with my episode on sight reading, I'm going to give you some actionable steps just to kind of keep it consistent. With the sight reading episode, I gave you 10 actionable steps of how to improve playing by ear, how to get better at it. But before I do that, I want to talk about an important difference that may have crossed your mind at some point in this episode. And that is this. We are talking about the ability to play by ear. We are not talking about the ability to transcribe music. So those are different skills that have a lot of obvious common similarities. Playing by ear is simply gathering enough information from what you're hearing or what you've heard before and going to your instrument and playing it to the best of your ability. So as I said, a paraphrase, of course, is acceptable when you're working on this. People who transcribe for a living, and this is one of the things that I've done before. I've had, it's actually kind of part of the process when I'm arranging for songwriters for a musical. I typically get them recording their demo, and I get a lyric sheet or sometimes, a script, that has the lyrics. And I have to get everything from what they're singing. I have to write it down, and it's important that what I write down is exactly what they sang, because they'll play it back and they'll get someone to help, and they'll let me know if it's not quite what I did. In fact, they've been known to say this should be a D instead of a C. It's very demanding work, and it takes steps of practice that I'm not really going to go over much at all on these actionable steps to playing by ear. But you don't need to do that. Like if you're to play by ear, you don't even have to know how to write it down. It helps, but this is not something that we're really going over in these steps. So anyways, let's get to these steps. Ways that you can get better at playing by ear. And as a reminder, these are steps that if you teach this, these are ideas for how to include this in your lesson. Because as I said with sight reading, not to recap all of the steps that I did in that episode, but the main thing that I said was, if your idea of improving sight reading is just to put music in front of you that you haven't played before and just play it, that is a step to getting better at sight reading. But it's sometimes not very helpful, because what we're lacking are the skills that would enable us to do that better. For example, knowing what our notes are, knowing our techniques without having to watch our hands. Those were two of the steps. So working on those separately will help you with sight reading. So playing by ear involves a lot of little sub-skills, and a reminder, sub-skills include things like technique and theory, and I'll get to that in just a moment. But when it comes to playing by ear, the first thing that I would recommend is that you work on every kind of ear training recognition, so that you know all of your intervals, scales, and chords when you hear them. Now, you can do this in levels, and I would also do one at a time. I would start with intervals. I feel like intervals is kind of the backbone of hearing things. With intervals, you can figure out scales and you can figure out chords. But start with, I would say, major and perfect intervals. So major second, major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, major seventh. These are the intervals that you get from the first note of a major scale to all of the subsequent degrees that follow. So first to the second, first to the third, and so on. And then add the minor alternatives to the second, third, sixth, and seventh, so that you're working on the major and minor and the perfect. And then include the tritone in that. Now, again, we're talking about ear training of intervals, so it's not at all necessary for you to practice hearing augmented and diminished intervals, because those are just respellings of major and minor intervals, and in some cases, some perfect intervals. If you can tell something's a minor third by the way it sounds, well, there's a theoretical reason, and especially if you're transcribing, as I mentioned before, you probably want to know if that really should be an augmented second. But when it comes to figuring out what to play, it's not really that necessary. So knowing your intervals by their sounds, and then Start putting that into scales. Start off with major, natural minor, harmonic minor, melodic minor, and chromatic. And then add whole tone. And then add all of your modes, which include Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, Locrian. Add your blues scales. So there's a website called musictheory.net. And I've done some tutorials before, and on my YouTube channel, it's probably going to be a little bit later in August, probably maybe early September. I've already recorded the bits necessary. I just need to edit and schedule and all that for practicing your interval ear training on musictheory.net. You can get started, but when that comes out, that's something you might want to check out if you're struggling with it. And of course, when it comes to chords, you need to practice, I would say, in root position, major, minor, and then add diminished and augmented, and then start working on those in pairs and then threes and fours in inversions as well. So like go back to major, minor, but make it just first inversion, second inversion. Add that to your root position choice. And then do that just with diminished and augmented, and then mix them together. And then let's go to our seventh chords. Major 7 chord, dominant 7, minor 7, half diminished 7, or minor 7 flat 5 for you jazz players out there, and diminished 7th. And then you have like your minor major 7. And then put those in inversions and maybe do them 2 at a time, and then maybe 3 or 4 at a time, and then, get all 6 of those 7th chords I just mentioned in there. And then kind of learn, what does it sound like? If you're going to be doing anything with jazz, practice some extended to hear what a 9th chord sounds like, what types of 11th and 13th chords sound like. If you're a jazz player, you really want to know the difference when you hear a dominant 7 as is versus one with a sharp 5 or a flat 5 or a flat 9 or a sharp 9 or a regular 9. They all have a very distinctive sound that you want to just, when you hear it, just again, as I often use the analogy or the comparison of knowing your letters versus knowing your words. You don't want to have to go, well, that's a G and a B and an F and an A sharp, so that's a G7 sharp 9. Now you want to hear that sound that you get when you play that. And you want that to just kind of register in your brain as, when I hear that sound, that is a G7 sharp 9. So I know I'm spending a lot of time on this step, but it's an important step. You need to work on your ear training. So I think you kind of probably suspected this. This is not a big surprise. To play by ear and to get better at it, you need to work on the tool of ear training. But I would focus on intervals first, then scales, and then chords. Okay, so the second thing that you can do if you're an instrumentalist, work more on singing along with your music. So you don't even have to practice playing by ear with this. Get out the music you're working on, or get out something that you're sight reading, and sing along with the melody as you watch the music. So this is a chance for you to get a visual association with the sound. And it's something that you do very powerfully when you sing, because you're bringing a kinesthetic awareness to your voice, and you're starting to make physical associations with like what a fifth feels like versus what a second versus what an octave feels like. And I think this will help you with your melodic ear training more than anything you could do by simply just practice singing along. If you're not actually a vocalist, if you identify as an instrumentalist, it is okay if your voice, if you're not happy with it. It's okay if, this is not your strength. The important thing is that you are trying, you are singing along, you're doing your best to match the pitch, and you are finding those melodies. And while you're doing that, and this is another fun thing, listen to pieces and sing along with the melody. But then listen to pieces and, like, let's say it's a classical piece, try to sing along with the counter line. Try to sing along with like the inner voice, or sing along with the bass line. Try to get off of the obvious steps of let's just sing along with the melody. And this could be for any genre, by the way. All right, the third thing that you can do, kind of related to that, practice singing intervals with accuracy. So this is more interval study. And again, you can start with your major second, third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, major seventh, perfect octave. Get to where you can sing those from, say, the key of C, and then practice that with different starting notes, so working within all of your scales. Again, add your minor intervals, add your tritone. And I would just say is up to an octave. Takes a bit of vocal skill to sing beyond an octave, and you can certainly practice that if you want, but I think you're going to do fine if you'll just practice singing with some degree of accuracy your intervals and kind of know them by name as you're doing that. So the fourth thing is very related to numbers 2 and 3, especially to number 3. There's a thing we haven't talked about yet called perfect pitch. I just wanted to say it, to say if you don't have it, don't worry about it. Put it away. You'll see people online offering courses to teach you perfect pitch. I have met truly outstanding, well-rounded musicians who do not have perfect pitch. Let me advise you to spend your time, your energy, not doing that, but instead working on your relative pitch. So the difference is what we call perfect pitch means that at any given point I could ask you to sing an F sharp, or I play an F sharp and ask you what it is, you would know it with no other reference point. But relative pitch is to say, I give you the sound of a C, or you go to your instrument and you kind of tap out, like figure out what key you're listening to. It's like, okay, you're listening to Star Wars, C, no, that's a little high, let's try B, no, a little high, B flat. Okay, we're in B flat. All right, you have that. That's all you need. Now that you know what scale you're in, and maybe you figure out what the very first note is, you are able to figure out all the other notes because you know your intervals. And so this is taking this to the next step. This is to say, I give you a C, like I play middle C, and I ask you to sing the G above. So there's some ways you could do that. You could know that's the fifth note of the scale, and I can go do, re, mi, fa, sol. Or I can know that it's a perfect fifth. I'm going to go from 1, 5, da-dum. So if I know the sound of a C, I can figure out a G. I can figure out any note because I just have to know what interval it is relative to the pitch that I've been given, my reference note, or the note I just did, if I'm going, in a piece of music. And I just have to recognize that interval and I have to know how to sing that interval. So it all goes together, everything that we've said so far. So don't worry about perfect pitch. Work really hard on developing your relative pitch, because that is something that you can do and you can improve no matter what your age is or how long you've been playing music. All right, number 5, let's talk about the sub-skills. I want to focus on technique and theory. So it doesn't do you a lot of good to try to play by ear if you're limited in what you can actually play. So this is just more reason to work on your technique. But again, I believe in working on your technique for specific purposes. So when you are learning to play your technique, like to actually know it, you should watch your hands. When you're learning to play it for sight reading purposes, you should find it written down on sheet music and watch that while you play it, and play it slowly and being aware of how things feel. For ear training, you could do a combination. You could watch your hands, but what I would really do is close your eyes and really try hard to just feel and listen and not to see what you're doing, but work on your technique basically blind. Focus yourself to listen more on what everything sounds like, but also work while you're watching to improve the technique itself to make sure that you're playing as well as you can. And as I'm going to say with everything, you're especially going to hear this a lot next week. This will not be a surprise when we talk about transposing. You need to practice in every single key, not just your favorites. There's a really good tool for working on this, and it's called the Circle of Fifths. I have an episode called The Circle of Fifths and Everything It Reveals. That's a theory episode. Doesn't really apply to what I'm talking about right now. But one of the things that you can use the Circle of Fifths for is that If you go to the top, it's going to show you the more common keys. If you go to the bottom, it's going to show you the least common keys. You can work yourself basically from the top clockwise down to the 6 o'clock spot, and then you can keep on going, or you can go back to the top of the circle and work counterclockwise down to the bottom 6 o'clock spot. Go one way, you're gradually adding sharps. You go the other way, you're gradually adding flats. But work on your scales, your chords, your arpeggios from all of those techniques. And something I didn't even really think about until probably 5 years ago when I saw this written down, is this a really good practice to take your scale, for example, and always practice it 4 different ways. That is to say, not just start at the bottom of the scale and in a legato style play up and down, but sometimes take that legato and start at the top of the scale and go down and up. And then do those again, but make it staccato this time. So staccato from bottom going up and down, and then from top going down and up. So maybe work on fewer scales at a time, but get used to that. Because again, when you're listening to music, you're not always going to be hearing the standard textbook version. All right, number 6 is where we actually get to the point where we're going to try to play by ear now. And I'm going to say the first thing you should try to do, whatever you pick to play along with, is just practice isolated elements at first. So, again, find something in a key that you're good with. Don't listen to something in D flat major unless you're able to play in that key, but, go ahead and find that. But first, just imitate the rhythm. Just go to a table or desk or whatever and just tap along to the rhythm that you're hearing. Get used to just imitating the rhythm. Then you want to play along to figure out the melody. So just follow along with the melody, figure it out, and leave everything else. Again, try to do it rhythmically. And then you can just work on the harmony. So this is assuming you're playing everything like at the keyboard or whatever, but leave out the melody and don't even really worry about the rhythm. Just try to find the chords. And then try to combine 2 of those elements together, and then try all 3. And then you can try to find details that you missed the first time and try to add those in as you're able. And the other thing that I would say, as with any practice, you don't have to do the whole thing at once. Just be willing to start with a phrase or 2 and then add them together until you have a whole piece. So this is a whole lot of stop, rewind, play again, stop, rewind, play again. Probably annoying to anybody who's listening, but it is the tool that you use when you're learning to play by ear. The 7th thing that you can do is kind of make your own ear training method book series. So you could take a method book. So, in the world of piano, I'm talking about Faber, Bastian, Alfred's, the Music Tree. There's a lot of method books out there. And a lot of them, I can go on YouTube or I can go to a website and I can hear those pieces being performed. And of course, the idea is that you use the sheet music as a student, but if you're getting stuck, you can go hear someone playing it. Well, what I would say in this case is you get a table of contents or whatever, and you get all of the songs. Start with the primer level, level 1, whatever is the easiest level. And all you want to do is learn everything you can in those method books completely by ear. Now, it might be something you've taught before and you just don't have it memorized. Well, don't open the book and just go through and try to play along with just the recordings of what's in those method books. And progress the same way you would if you were using the music. So go on to level 2, level 3, where it gets harder, and keep doing your best to just play along, learn those pieces by ear. The 8th thing you can do is continue a habit of at least once a week trying to play something new by ear. So as you're working on these things, just as with anything else, the frequency of practice makes a difference. If playing by ear is a weakness and your goal right now, maybe your goal for the second half of 2024 is to get better at playing by ear, and that's your main focus, well then you probably should make this at least a 3 or 4 times a week thing that you're working on. because the volume of practice will make a big difference. All right, the ninth thing is once you figured out something by ear, like you figured out the melody, the chords, the rhythm, learn how to continue to polish, adjust, and master the music using just your ear, but in the same way that you would continue to practice, polish, master, adjust a piece of music if you were playing it with the sheet music. What would you do? You would look at some point you'd start saying, okay, I need to think about the dynamics. I need to think about bringing out this line here and then letting that voice hold back while I now bring out this other aspect of the music. You may think about some rubato, let's let the tempo push ahead and hold back, and let's get more of a difference between staccatos and bring out the accents and all of that. So do that. Continue to do that by ear. Keep listening and try to hear the things you've been missing or the things that you've been neglecting. So the 10th thing that I would offer as a step is take the music you've been practicing and make a habit of memorizing it. So memorizing is a sub-skill that I haven't really talked about, but it greatly helps your ability to play by ear. In fact, I have found a strong correlation in my 24 and a half years thus far of teaching piano. I have found that students naturally fall into the camp of people who can sight read but struggle to play by ear or memorize, and people who play by ear well and memorize well but don't sight read very well. And I really think it has a lot to do with what the eyes are doing. When the eyes are dependent on seeing the music on the page and not watching your hands or forcing yourself to just listen, I think it's very easy to kind of just see the notes, spit them out, which is great for sight reading. But for playing by ear or memorizing, you have to really think about what it is you're listening to. And you have to then play it without seeing it. And so I think there's a lot of strong correlation to that. So if you'll get better at memorizing your music, and what I would just say is just do it as a habit. You practice 4 measures, memorize those 4 measures before you go on. It doesn't mean you have to play it in concert or whatever you're preparing the music for. You don't have to play it from memory, but you'll be better off having practiced memorizing it. Okay, this is not part of the 10 steps, but I did leave a bonus on there. I did talk about transcription. So if you've done all this and you want to get better at playing by ear, you can push your boundaries of ear training by doing exercises in transcription. And again, progress the same way you would anything else. Practice just writing out the rhythm. Practice figuring out just what the chords are, and chord symbols is fine, and then melody, and then putting it together. I'm starting to do a lot more with my YouTube channel. It's probably going to be, my goal is like about every 10 to 12 days, I'm going to come out with a new video. So kind of average about 3 new videos a month that have nothing to do with the podcast. It's piano tutorials, but also tutorials for those who compose and those who arrange. And it's probably going to be a while. I've got a lot of video ideas. In fact, a lot of videos I need to edit. But I would say at some point, probably in 2025, I am very likely to include a video tutorial on transcription and just kind of what is my step-by-step process. So, make sure you're subscribed to my YouTube channel to find these videos. It's in every single show note of every episode I've done so far. So including this episode, you can go find the link to my YouTube channel, but you can also do at David Lane Music 1. That is the number 1, David Lane Music 1. And you can find that. So we kind of reached the end of this episode. And playing by ear is something, once you've learned it, it's just fun, especially when you give yourself permission to just kind of paraphrase, not get everything exactly correct as you're learning it, and it's something that you can kind of adjust as you go. But this is a liberating way. And also, I really think that this core skill is a prerequisite, certainly for improvising, and it really helps a lot with transposition. So when I talk about the core skills, I really think your sight reading and playing by ear are the two really most important that you want to get down first. Not to say that you can't be really good at the other two I'm going to mention without being good at these two, but it is a good practice. So again, that's going to wrap up today's episode. Feel free to leave me a message of any thoughts that you have, either with your voice at speakpipe.com/musiciantoolkit or through a message at my website at davidlanemusic.com. There's a contact form at the bottom of the homepage. And you can also, while you're there, check out the other aspects of my website, including a page for the Musician Toolkit where you'll find all of the past episodes of this podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it on your social media or in a text message or an email to someone who could definitely benefit from this episode. And if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe. And actually, if you're not watching on YouTube, as I mentioned, I'm going to be doing a lot more stuff there. So go on over and feel free to offer your support. Find this video for this podcast, even if you listen to it on a podcast app, and just go ahead and click the thumbs up. Give it a like. Just help this be more visible to more people. And go ahead and subscribe while you're there so that you'll get all the other types of videos that I'm offering. Again, that's going to wrap up today's episode. But I'll be back with you again next week. So until then, thank you so much for listening.